The moment Nathaniel Whitmore failed to appear at the altar, Natalie Bradford knew her life had just shattered into 1,000 pieces in front of every soul in Yuba City, California. She stood there in her cream-colored wedding dress, the finest thing she had ever owned, hand-stitched by her mother over countless evenings by lamplight. The small wooden church was packed to capacity on that sweltering August morning in 1882, with townspeople crammed into every pew and spilling out the open doors into the dusty street beyond. Reverend Matthews had already begun the ceremony, his weathered Bible open in his hands, when a boy came running up the aisle with a note clutched in his fist. The Reverend read it silently, his face draining of color. He looked at Natalie with something that might have been pity or horror or both. "Miss Bradford, I am afraid there has been a development." Natalie felt her father stiffen beside her. "What kind of development?" "Mr. Whitmore has left town. He caught the morning stage to Sacramento. He will not be returning." The words landed like physical blows. Natalie heard gasping from the pews behind her, whispers starting to rise like steam from a kettle. Her vision blurred at the edges. This could not be happening. Nathaniel had courted her for nearly a year. He had asked her father for her hand. They had planned this day down to the smallest detail. How could he simply leave? "There must be some mistake," she managed to say, though her voice sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Reverend Matthews shook his head slowly. "The stage driver confirmed it himself. I am terribly sorry, my dear." Her father took her arm, his grip tight with barely controlled fury. "Come, Natalie, let us get you home." But she could not move. Her feet felt rooted to the rough wooden floorboards. Behind her, the whispers were growing louder, transforming into full conversations. She could hear the speculation, the shock, the schadenfreude of those who secretly enjoyed witnessing such spectacular misfortune. Her mother was crying somewhere in the front pew. Her younger sisters were probably mortified beyond words. "Miss Bradford." The voice came from near the back of the church, deep and clear and unfamiliar. "I would be honored to stand with you." Every head turned. Natalie looked up through her tears to see a man rising from one of the back pews. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that touched his collar, and eyes that even from this distance seemed to hold the color of storm clouds. He wore simple clothing, the typical garb of a working cowboy. Dark trousers, a plain shirt, a vest that had seen better days. He held his hat in his hands as he walked down the aisle with long, purposeful strides. The church fell into stunned silence. "Who are you?" Natalie's father demanded, stepping forward protectively. The stranger stopped a respectful distance away. "My name is Vincent Quinlan. I have been working at the Hawthorne Ranch these past 6 months. I do not know your daughter, sir, but no woman deserves to be humiliated like this. If Miss Bradford is willing, I would offer myself as a husband in place of the coward who abandoned her." The audacity of it struck Natalie speechless. She stared at this Vincent Quinlan, this complete stranger who was proposing to save her from public disgrace with an offer that was either breathtakingly noble or utterly insane. His face was serious, his jaw set with determination. He was perhaps 25 or 26 years old, weathered by sun and wind, but undeniably handsome in a rugged, unpolished way. "This is madness," her father said. "You expect my daughter to marry a man she has never even met?" "I expect nothing, sir. I only offer a solution to an impossible situation. Miss Bradford can accept or decline as she sees fit. But if she accepts, I give you my word that I will be a faithful and devoted husband to her for all the days of my life." Natalie found her voice at last. "Why would you do this?" Vincent's gray eyes met hers directly. "Because it is the right thing to do, and because I believe every promise should be kept, especially the ones made in church." The irony was not lost on anyone. Nathaniel Whitmore, who had courted her properly and known her family for years, had broken his promise and fled like a thief in the night. This stranger was offering to keep a promise he had never made, to a woman he had never spoken to, for no reason other than honor. Natalie looked at her father, at the Reverend, at the sea of faces watching her with hungry curiosity. She could walk out of this church as an abandoned bride, the subject of gossip and pity for years to come. She could watch her younger sister's prospects dim because of the scandal attached to their family name. Or she could take the hand of this mysterious cowboy and salvage something from this nightmare. "I accept," she heard herself say. Her father made a choking sound. "Natalie, you cannot be serious." "I am perfectly serious, Father." She turned back to Vincent Quinlan. "If you truly mean what you say, then I accept your offer." Something flickered in Vincent's eyes, relief, perhaps, or determination. He walked the remaining distance to the altar and stood beside her. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight scar on his chin, the calluses on his hands when he reached out to take hers. His grip was warm and steady. Reverend Matthews looked between them with bewilderment. "This is highly irregular." "So is leaving a bride at the altar," Vincent said quietly. "But we are both here now, willing and of sound mind. If Miss Bradford consents, I see no reason why we cannot proceed." Natalie's mother had stopped crying and was staring at the scene with her mouth open. Her father looked like he might have an apoplexy, but slowly the Reverend nodded. "Very well. If this is truly what you both want, let us continue." The ceremony that followed felt surreal, like something happening to someone else. Natalie repeated the vows in a voice that did not sound like her own. Vincent's voice was steady and sure. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Vincent leaned down and pressed a chaste kiss to her forehead. His lips were warm against her skin. "Thank you," he murmured, so quietly that only she could hear. "I promise I will not make you regret this." Then they were walking back down the aisle together, and the church erupted into chaos. People were shouting questions, exclaiming in disbelief, craning their necks to get a better look at the couple. Natalie kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, her hand tucked into the crook of Vincent's arm. His stride was unhurried, unbothered by the commotion around them. Outside, the California sun was blinding after the dimness of the church. Natalie blinked against the brightness, feeling dizzy and unmoored. She had entered that church as Nathaniel's intended bride. She was leaving it as Vincent Quinlan's wife, married to a man whose face she had not even seen until 10 minutes ago. "Are you all right?" Vincent asked. They were standing on the church steps while people flooded out around them. "No," Natalie said honestly. "I am not all right. I do not know what I am." "That is fair." He glanced around at the growing crowd. "Is there supposed to be a celebration of some kind?" Natalie almost laughed, though it came out more like a sob. "There was going to be a reception at my parents' home. I suppose it still exists, though I cannot imagine anyone will want to attend now." "Then let us go and face it together." Her parents pushed through the crowd toward them. Her father's face was red with emotion. "Natalie Margaret Bradford, what have you done?" "What I had to do," Natalie said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "And it is Natalie Quinlan now." Her mother was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "This is all so sudden, so strange. We know nothing about this young man." Vincent addressed them both with quiet respect. "Mr. and Mrs. Bradford, I understand your concern. I am a stranger to you, and this is not how anyone envisioned this day unfolding. But I assure you, my intentions toward your daughter are honorable. I will work hard to provide for her and protect her. I would welcome the chance to know you both better, if you will allow it." Natalie's father seemed to deflate slightly. He looked old suddenly and tired. "What is done, I suppose. Come to the house. We should not let all that food go to waste." The reception was the most awkward affair Natalie had ever endured. People came mostly out of morbid curiosity, she suspected, eager to observe the bizarre situation up close. They congratulated her with voices full of questions they were too polite to ask directly. They eyed Vincent with undisguised suspicion. The ranch hands from Hawthorne spread, vouched for him in gruff tones, saying he was a hard worker and an honest man, but that did little to ease the tension. Through it all, Vincent stayed close to her side. He did not seem bothered by the stares or the whispers. He filled a plate with food and brought it to her, noticing that she had eaten nothing. He fielded questions from her relatives with patient courtesy. When her uncle asked bluntly what his prospects were, Vincent answered honestly, "I have been working as a ranch hand for the past several years, moving from place to place. I have some savings, enough to make a start. I had been hoping to buy land of my own someday, to raise horses. Now that I have a wife, I will work twice as hard to make that dream a reality." "A drifter," her uncle said with a sniff. "A working man," Vincent corrected calmly. "There is no shame in honest labor." As the afternoon wore on, Natalie found herself watching her unexpected husband with growing curiosity. He was clearly uncomfortable with the social niceties of the reception, but he endured them without complaint. He did not drink the whiskey that was being passed around, keeping his wits sharp. When children approached him with bold questions, he crouched down to their level and answered them seriously, which made them giggle. Finally, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Vincent leaned close to her and spoke quietly. "I think we have fulfilled our obligations here. Would you like to leave?" "Yes," Natalie said fervently. "Please." They made their excuses to her parents. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering, "I do not understand what happened today, but I hope you will be happy, my darling girl." Her father shook Vincent's hand with obvious reluctance. "Take care of her. That is all I ask." "You have my word, sir." It was only when they were walking down the dusty street together, away from her family home, that Natalie realized she had no idea where they were going. She had assumed she would be moving into the house Nathaniel had been renting at the edge of town. But Vincent was a ranch hand. He probably lived in a bunkhouse with a dozen other men. "Where are we going?" she asked, trying to keep the anxiety from her voice. Vincent glanced at her. "I have a small room above the general store. It is not much, but it is private. I paid the rent through the end of the month. After that, I suppose we will need to figure something else out." A room above a store. One room, Natalie assumed. She had just married a stranger, and now she was going to share a single room with him. The reality of what she had done was starting to sink in with crushing weight. As if sensing her thoughts, Vincent stopped walking. They were in the middle of the street, with the evening shadows stretching long around them. "Miss Bradford, Natalie, I need you to understand something." She looked up at him, at his serious gray eyes. "What I offered today was protection and respectability. Nothing more, unless you choose otherwise. I will not force myself upon you. We may be married in the eyes of the law and the church, but I believe a true marriage requires more than words spoken under duress. I will sleep on the floor. I will give you whatever space and time you need. If you decide in a week, a month, a year that you want an annulment, I will not stand in your way." Natalie felt something loosen in her chest. "You would do that? Let me go if I asked." "I would not keep you prisoner," Vincent said simply. "You have had enough of your choices taken away today." The kindness in his words made her eyes sting with fresh tears. "Thank you. That means more to me than you know." They resumed walking. The room above the general store was reached by an exterior staircase at the back of the building. Vincent unlocked the door and stepped aside to let her enter first. The room was small but clean. There was a narrow bed against one wall, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, a small table with 2 chairs, and a trunk at the foot of the bed. A single window looked out over the alley. It was sparse, almost monastic, but there were small touches that suggested someone actually lived here. A book on the table, a shirt hanging from a peg on the wall, a pair of boots lined up neatly by the door. "I am sorry it is not better," Vincent said, closing the door behind them. "I was not expecting to bring a wife home today." "I was not expecting to marry a stranger today," Natalie replied. "So, I suppose we are both surprised." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It transformed his face, making him look younger and less severe. That is one way to put it. There was an awkward silence. Natalie stood in the middle of the small room, still wearing her wedding dress, with no idea what to do next. Her trunk of belongings was still at her parents' house. She had no nightclothes, no toiletries, nothing but the dress on her back and the wilting flowers in her hair. Vincent seemed to realize this at the same moment. "You will need your things. Let me go and fetch them for you. I can come with you. You should rest. It has been a long day." He grabbed his hat from the peg. "I will be back soon." After he left, Natalie sank down onto one of the chairs. The events of the day crashed over her all at once. She should have been married to Nathaniel right now, celebrating with friends and family, preparing to start the life they had planned together. Instead, she was sitting in a tiny room above a store, married to a cowboy she had only met a few hours ago, with no idea what her future held. She wanted to cry, but the tears would not come. She felt numb, hollowed out. When Vincent returned half an hour later, he was carrying her trunk with the help of one of her brothers. They hauled it up the stairs and set it down by the door. Her brother gave her an awkward hug and a searching look. "Are you sure you are all right, Nat?" "I am managing, Thomas. Thank you for bringing my things." After Thomas left, Vincent opened the trunk and began setting her belongings around the room. He hung her dresses on pegs beside his shirt, stacked her books next to his on the table, set her brush and mirror on the washstand. He moved with careful efficiency, as if trying to make her feel at home in this strange space. "I will go get us some supper," he said when he was done. "There is a place down the street that makes decent stew." "Vincent." He paused at the door, looking back at her. "Why did you really do it? Offer to marry me, I mean." He was quiet for a long moment. "My mother was abandoned by my father when I was very young. She spent the rest of her life struggling to survive, working herself to exhaustion, trying to provide for me and my sisters. She died when I was 16, worn down by hardship and heartbreak. When I saw you standing there at that altar, alone and humiliated, I saw her. I could not walk away. I could not let another woman suffer that fate if I had the power to prevent it." The raw honesty in his words pierced through Natalie's numbness. "I am sorry about your mother. That must have been terribly difficult. It taught me what matters: honor, keeping your word, protecting those who need protection." He settled his hat on his head. "I will be back with food." After he left again, Natalie finally let herself cry. The days that followed were strange and awkward and surprisingly gentle. Vincent rose before dawn each morning to ride out to the Hawthorne Ranch for work, leaving Natalie alone in the small room. She spent the time trying to adjust to her new reality, unpacking her things, exploring the town she had lived in all her life, but now saw with different eyes. People stared at her wherever she went. Some offered congratulations that sounded sincere, while others could barely hide their fascination with the scandal. Mrs. Henderson at the bakery asked pointed questions about how she and Vincent had met, clearly fishing for gossip. Natalie learned to give vague, pleasant answers that revealed nothing. In the evenings, Vincent would return exhausted and covered in dust. He would wash up at the basin, then go fetch their supper from the restaurant down the street or from the boarding house on the corner. They would eat together at the small table, making stilted conversation about their respective days. True to his word, Vincent slept on the floor every night. Natalie had protested at first, saying it was ridiculous for him to be uncomfortable in his own home, but he was adamant. "I gave you my word," he said. "This is how it needs to be until you decide otherwise." As the days turned into weeks, Natalie found herself growing more comfortable with her unexpected husband. He was quiet by nature, not given to unnecessary words, but when he did speak, it was with careful thought. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard sometimes, making her laugh when she least expected it. He was patient with her moods, understanding when she needed silence and space. She learned things about him in fragments. He was 27 years old. He had 2 younger sisters who lived with an aunt in Missouri. He had been working cattle and horses since he was 14, drifting from ranch to ranch across the West. He could read and write well, unusual for a working cowboy, because his mother had been educated and had insisted on teaching her children. He loved horses with a passion that lit up his usually reserved face. "That is what I want," he told her one evening, as they sat at the table with the remnants of their supper between them. "A place of my own where I can raise and train horses, not fancy thoroughbreds or anything like that. Just good, solid working horses. There is always a need for them." "It sounds like a good dream," Natalie said. "It is more than a dream. I have been saving for years. I have almost enough to buy some land." He hesitated. "I need to be honest with you about something. I have been talking to a man who owns property about 10 miles north of here. He is willing to sell 40 acres at a fair price. I was planning to buy it this fall, before winter set in. But now that I have a wife, I should discuss it with you first. It would mean building a house from the ground up, living rough for a while. It would not be easy." Natalie considered this. The idea of leaving the town where she had lived her entire life was frightening. But staying here, living in this tiny room, being the subject of endless gossip, was not much better. Would it be a real house, with walls and a roof? Vincent's mouth twitched. "Yes, I promise it would have both walls and a roof. Nothing fancy, at least not at first, but solid and weatherproof." "Then I think you should buy the land. I would rather build something new than stay trapped in other people's opinions of us." Something shifted in his expression. "You would be willing to do that? Leave town and start over?" "What do I have to keep me here?" "My family, yes, but I can visit them. Everything else is tainted by what happened. A fresh start sounds appealing." That night, as she lay in the narrow bed and listened to Vincent's steady breathing from his bedroll on the floor, Natalie realized that she had not thought about Nathaniel in days. The man who had abandoned her, who had caused all this upheaval, had become almost irrelevant. She still felt hurt and angry when she let herself dwell on it, but mostly she just felt indifferent. He was part of her past. Vincent was her present, strange as that reality was. The land purchase went through in early September. Vincent took Natalie out to see it on a Sunday afternoon, borrowing a wagon from the ranch. They drove north along dusty roads, through rolling golden hills dotted with oak trees. The property was located in a small valley with a creek running through it. The soil looked good, and there was plenty of grazing land. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way. "What do you think?" Vincent asked as they stood together surveying the land. The September sun was warm on Natalie's face. "I think it is perfect," she said honestly. Over the following weeks, Vincent spent every spare moment working on the property. He built a small one-room cabin first, working mostly alone, but with occasional help from some of the ranch hands. Natalie visited as often as she could, bringing him lunch and water, watching the structure slowly take shape. It was humble but sturdy, with a good fireplace and real glass windows that Vincent insisted on, despite the expense. "You need natural light," he said when she questioned the cost. "I do not want you feeling trapped in a dark box." By late October, the cabin was finished enough to live in. They moved their few belongings from the room above the store, loading everything into a borrowed wagon. It was strange saying goodbye to that tiny space where they had spent the first months of their marriage, living like courteous strangers. The cabin felt enormous compared to the single room, even though it was still quite small. There was space for a real bed, a table with chairs, a cook stove, shelves for their belongings. Vincent had even built a separate small room at the back for privacy and storage. "I will build us a bigger house eventually," he said as they unpacked, "with separate bedrooms and a real parlor, but this will do for now." "It is wonderful, Vincent, truly." That night, they faced the same awkward sleeping arrangement in new surroundings. The cabin had only one bed. Vincent immediately began pulling out blankets to make a bedroll on the floor. "This is absurd," Natalie said. He looked at her questioningly. "We have been married for 3 months. We live in a one-room cabin in the middle of nowhere. You cannot sleep on the floor forever." She took a breath. "The bed is large enough for both of us. We can put pillows down the middle if you want. But I cannot keep letting you hurt your back, sleeping on hard ground when there is a perfectly good bed right here." Vincent was very still. "Are you sure?" "I am sure that this arrangement is ridiculous. I trust you, Vincent. You have given me no reason not to. Please, just sleep in the bed." So they worked out a new routine. They would change into their night clothes separately, with one person going into the back room for privacy. They would lie down on opposite sides of the bed, with a careful distance between them. It was awkward at first, both of them lying rigid and hyper-aware of the other's presence. But gradually, over nights and weeks, it began to feel normal. Vincent bought 3 horses with some of his remaining savings, a sturdy mare for Natalie to ride, a gelding for himself, and a young stallion he planned to train and breed. He built a small barn and corral. He worked on fencing the property. Natalie planted a vegetable garden near the cabin and learned to cook on the new stove. She made curtains for the windows and braided a rag rug for the floor. They were building a life together, piece by piece. Winter came to the valley, turning the golden hills green with fresh grass from the rains. Natalie and Vincent fell into comfortable rhythms. They worked side by side during the day, shared simple meals in the evening, sat by the fire, reading or talking quietly. They visited her family in town every few weeks, and the visits grew less tense as people gradually accepted the marriage. Her mother even admitted once that Vincent seemed like a good man, though she still clearly found the whole situation baffling. It was on a cold January night, as they sat by the fire with rain pattering on the roof, that something shifted between them. Vincent was mending a broken bridle, his long fingers working the leather with practiced ease. Natalie was sewing a torn shirt. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly. This was her life now. This quiet, kind man was her husband. And somewhere along the way, without her quite noticing, she had stopped thinking of their marriage as a temporary arrangement. "Vincent," she said quietly. He looked up. "Yes?" "Do you ever regret it, offering to marry me that day?" "Not once." His answer was immediate and firm. "Do you regret accepting?" Natalie set down her sewing. "No. I thought I might, but I do not. You have been nothing but good to me, better than I had any right to expect." You had every right to expect basic decency and respect. Nathaniel did not seem to think so. Vincent's jaw tightened at the mention of her former fiancé. Nathaniel Whitmore was a fool and a coward. His loss is my gain. The words hung in the air between them. Slowly, Natalie rose from her chair and crossed the small space to where Vincent sat. She knelt beside him, placing her hand over his. "I think I would like for this to be a real marriage," she said softly. "If you would like that too." Vincent's gray eyes searched her face. "You are certain? I do not want you to feel obligated." "I am certain. I care for you, Vincent. I think I have for a while now. I want us to truly be husband and wife." He set aside the bridle and cupped her face in his calloused hands. "I have cared for you since the moment I saw you standing at that altar. I fell in love with your courage that day, and I fall deeper every time I see your smile." Then he kissed her, gentle and tentative at first, then deeper as she responded. It felt nothing like the few chaste kisses she had shared with Nathaniel during their courtship. This was real and warm and full of restrained passion. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Come to bed," Natalie whispered. That night, they removed the line of pillows from the middle of the bed. Vincent held her close, his arms strong and sure around her. They explored each other with tenderness and growing confidence. He was patient and careful, mindful of her inexperience. When they finally joined together as husband and wife, in truth, it was with mutual desire and genuine affection. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Vincent pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I love you, Natalie Quinlan." "I love you too," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. The months that followed were the happiest Natalie had ever known. The marriage that had begun so strangely blossomed into something real and deep. Vincent was everything Nathaniel had never been. Steady, attentive, genuinely interested in her thoughts and feelings. He showed his love in 100 small ways, making sure she had the warmest blanket on cold nights, bringing her wildflowers he found on his rides, sitting beside her in companionable silence while they worked on their separate tasks. In turn, Natalie threw herself into building their home and life. She learned to manage the household on Vincent's modest income, stretching every dollar. She helped with the horses, discovering that she had a knack for gentling the skittish ones. She wrote long letters to Vincent's sisters in Missouri, extending the first genuine connection they had to their brother's new wife. Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers across the valley. Vincent's horse breeding venture was beginning to show promise. He had several buyers interested in the young horses he was training. The work was hard, but it was satisfying in a way that his previous jobs had never been. This was his land, his dream finally taking shape. In April, Natalie realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be certain, then told Vincent one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "I think I am with child." Vincent went very still. Then he turned to her with an expression of such pure joy that it took her breath away. "Truly, I believe so. It is still early, but all the signs are there." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy about it?" "Happy? Natalie, I am beyond happy. I am blessed." He pulled back to look at her face. "Are you happy?" "Yes," she said, surprised to realize it was true. A year ago, she had been planning a different life with a different man. Now she was carrying the child of a cowboy she had married on impulse, living in a cabin he had built with his own hands, and she had never been more content. "I am very happy." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Natalie's mother was beside herself with excitement, immediately beginning to sew baby clothes and offering endless advice. Vincent became even more protective than usual, insisting that Natalie not overwork herself. He took on all the heavy chores and hired a local girl to come help with the housework a few times a week. By summer, Natalie's belly was swelling noticeably. She felt the baby move for the first time in late June, a flutter like butterfly wings. When she pressed Vincent's hand to the spot, his face was full of wonder. "That is our child," he said reverently. "Our son or daughter," Natalie agreed. "Either would be perfect." They spent long evenings discussing names, debating the merits of various options. They talked about how they would raise the child, what values they wanted to instill. Vincent was adamant that any child of his, boy or girl, would learn to read and write and think for themselves. "My mother gave me that gift," he said. "I will pass it on." In early October, as the weather was just beginning to turn cool, Natalie went into labor. It was evening, and Vincent rode hard to town to fetch the midwife and Natalie's mother. The hours that followed were long and painful, but Natalie endured them with determination. Vincent stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, supporting her through each contraction. Finally, as dawn light was beginning to creep through the windows, the baby arrived with a loud, healthy cry. The midwife cleaned the infant and wrapped it in soft blankets. "You have a son," she announced, placing the baby in Natalie's arms. Natalie looked down at the tiny red face of her child and felt her heart expand impossibly. He was perfect, with dark hair like his father, and a pair of lungs that suggested he would be a strong, vigorous boy. Vincent was openly crying as he gazed at his son. "He is beautiful. You are amazing. I love you both so much." They named him James Vincent Quinlan, after Vincent's grandfather. Little James was a demanding baby, waking frequently to nurse and fussing when he wanted attention. But both Natalie and Vincent were utterly besotted with him. Vincent would spend hours just holding his son, walking him around the cabin, singing old songs he remembered from his childhood. Parenthood transformed them both. The responsibilities were exhausting, but they faced them together, supporting each other through the sleepless nights and anxious days. They marveled at every tiny milestone. James's first smile, his first laugh, the way he would grip their fingers in his small fists. As winter settled over the valley again, Natalie found herself reflecting on the incredible journey of the past year and a half. She had been abandoned at the altar, married a stranger, built a new life in the wilderness, and become a mother. The woman she had been that terrible day in the church felt like a different person entirely. One snowy evening, as they sat by the fire with James asleep in his cradle, Vincent said, "I have been thinking about expanding the house." "Oh?" Natalie was knitting a new blanket, her needles clicking rhythmically. "We need more space. A proper bedroom for us, a room for James, maybe another room or two for future children, if we are blessed with more." He looked at her carefully. "Would you want more children?" "I would love more children. In time, when James is a bit older. Then I will start drawing up plans. We can begin building in the spring." The house expansion became Vincent's winter project. He spent evenings sketching layouts, calculating materials, planning every detail. When spring arrived, he hired 2 men from town to help with the construction. The work was slow and demanding, but gradually a real house began to take shape around the original cabin. By summer, they had a proper 2-story home with 4 bedrooms, a separate kitchen, a parlor, and even a small room Vincent designated as a study. It was modest compared to some of the grand houses in town, but to Natalie it was a palace. More than that, it was proof of how far they had come, built with Vincent's earnings from his successful horse business. James took his first steps in that new house, tottering across the parlor floor into his mother's waiting arms. He spoke his first words there, "Mama," and then "Papa," each one celebrated as a momentous achievement. He grew into a curious, energetic toddler who followed his father everywhere, fascinated by the horses. In the spring of 1885, Natalie discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news felt less momentous and more like a natural progression. James would be a big brother. Their family was growing. "I hope it is a girl," Vincent said one evening, his hand resting on Natalie's still flat stomach. "A daughter with your beautiful eyes and stubborn chin." Natalie laughed. "My chin is not stubborn." "It is magnificently stubborn. It is one of the things I love most about you." Their second child was indeed a daughter, born in December of that year during a cold snap that froze the creek solid. They named her Elizabeth Rose, and she was as different from James as night from day. Where he had been loud and demanding, she was quiet and content. She had Natalie's coloring, with brown hair and blue eyes, but Vincent's serious expression even as an infant. James was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help care for her. Vincent built a larger bed for him so the baby could have the cradle. The house that had seemed so spacious when they first moved in was now full of the sounds and chaos of family life. As the years passed, the Quinlan family became a fixture in the valley. Vincent's reputation as a horse trainer spread throughout the region. People came from as far as Sacramento to buy his animals, knowing they were getting quality stock that had been raised and trained with patience and expertise. The ranch prospered, and Vincent was able to hire permanent help, expanding his operation. Natalie found her own place in the community. She helped organize social events, contributed to the church, and became known as someone who could be counted on in times of need. If a neighbor was sick or a family was struggling, Natalie was there with food and assistance. She had moved beyond being the scandalous abandoned bride to become a respected member of society in her own right. On their 5th wedding anniversary in August of 1887, Vincent surprised Natalie with a gift. He led her outside to where a beautiful buggy sat in front of the house, polished and gleaming. "For you," he said, "so you can visit your family and friends whenever you want without having to ask me for the wagon." Natalie threw her arms around his neck. "It is too much. How did you afford this?" "I sold that pair of matched bays I have been training. Got a very good price, and nothing is too much for you. You have given me everything, a home, children, a reason to build something lasting. This is just a small token of my gratitude." "I love you so much," Natalie said, kissing him soundly. "I love you too, more than I ever thought possible that day in the church." Later, as they lay in bed together in the house Vincent had built, Natalie thought about that day. It seemed like a lifetime ago. She had been so young and naive, certain that her life was ruined. She had believed Nathaniel when he said he loved her, had trusted in promises that turned out to be worthless. His abandonment had devastated her, but it had also freed her to find something real. Vincent's impulsive offer had seemed like madness at the time, but it had been the beginning of a true partnership. They had built this life together from nothing, learning to love each other through shared work and mutual respect. Their marriage had not started with passion or romance, but it had grown into something deep and unshakable. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent asked, pulling her closer. "How grateful I am that Nathaniel left me at the altar." Vincent chuckled. "That is not what I expected you to say." "It is true, though. If he had not abandoned me, I never would have married you. I would have had a perfectly conventional, probably perfectly miserable life as his wife. Instead, I have you and our children and this beautiful life we have created. I would not trade it for anything. Neither would I. Though I do wish I could have met you under better circumstances. You deserve better than to be humiliated like that." "Perhaps, but if it had happened differently, you might not have noticed me at all. You said yourself you were sitting in the back of the church. If everything had gone according to plan, we would have been strangers forever." "Then I suppose we should thank Nathaniel for being a coward." They both laughed at that. The bitterness of that long-ago hurt finally transmuted into something that could be examined without pain. In 1888, their 3rd child arrived, another son they named Thomas Robert. He was a large, healthy baby who seemed determined to catch up with his older siblings in size and energy as quickly as possible. The house was now truly full, with 3 young children filling every moment with noise and activity. Vincent hired more help for both the ranch and the household. A Mexican couple, Rosa and Miguel, came to work for them. Rosa helped Natalie with the children and the housework, while Miguel worked with the horses. They built a small cottage on the property for Rosa and Miguel to live in, creating an extended family of sorts. The ranch continued to prosper. Vincent was able to buy additional land, expanding their holdings. He built a proper barn with stalls for a dozen horses, along with training pens and grazing paddocks. The dream he had spoken of so tentatively in that tiny room above the general store had become a thriving reality. Natalie's family remained close. Her parents visited frequently, doting on their grandchildren. Her sisters married and started families of their own. Thomas, her brother, went into business in Sacramento, but came home often. The scandal of that wedding day had faded into family lore, a strange story they could tell with laughter rather than shame. One afternoon in the summer of 1890, Natalie was in town with the children when she encountered a ghost from her past. She was coming out of the mercantile with James and Elizabeth when a man called her name. "Natalie? Natalie Bradford?" She turned to see Nathaniel Whitmore standing on the boardwalk. He looked older, softer around the middle, with the beginnings of gray at his temples. He was dressed well, suggesting he had done all right for himself in whatever life he had fled to. "It is Natalie Quinlan," she corrected coolly. "Hello, Nathaniel." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I heard you were married. I am glad you landed on your feet." "Landed on my feet?" Natalie felt anger stirring, not for herself, but for the memory of that frightened, humiliated girl she had been. "I did more than land on my feet. I built a good life despite your cowardice. I know I hurt you. I have always regretted how I handled things. You did not handle anything. You ran away like a thief in the night, leaving me to face the consequences alone." James tugged on her skirt. "Mama, who is this man?" Natalie looked down at her son, then at Elizabeth holding her brother's hand, and felt the anger drain away. What did it matter now? Nathaniel was irrelevant, a minor character in a story that had moved far beyond him. "No one important, darling. Come, let us go home." She walked away without another word, loading the children into the buggy Vincent had given her. As she drove out of town, she glanced back once and saw Nathaniel still standing on the boardwalk, watching her go. She felt nothing for him, no anger, no regret, not even curiosity about why he had run or what his life had been. He was a stranger, less important to her than the countless other strangers she passed on the street. That evening, she told Vincent about the encounter. He listened quietly, then pulled her into his arms. "Are you all right?" "I am perfectly fine. Better than fine." Seeing him just reminded me how lucky I am, how much better my life turned out than anything I could have planned for myself. "Our life," Vincent corrected gently. "Everything we have, we built together. Yes, our life, our family, our love." The years continued to unfold in patterns of work and growth and deepening bonds. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Elizabeth was sweet and imaginative, constantly creating elaborate games and stories. Thomas was a whirlwind of energy, keeping everyone on their toes. In 1892, Natalie gave birth to their fourth child, a daughter they named Sarah Margaret. She was their last child, arriving when Natalie was 32 and Vincent was 37. By mutual unspoken agreement, they decided their family was complete. 4 healthy children were more blessings than either of them had dared hope for. The ranch continued to thrive. Vincent's reputation as a horse trainer had spread across California and beyond. He had contracts with several large ranches and even supplied horses to the U.S. cavalry on occasion. The work was demanding, but he had good help and could afford to be selective about which jobs he took. Natalie channeled her energy into her children's education and the community. She started a small school on their property, hiring a teacher to instruct not just her own children, but the children of their workers and neighboring ranchers. Education had been important to Vincent, and Natalie shared that value. She wanted their children to have opportunities and choices. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Natalie on a trip to San Francisco. It was the first time they had been away from the children and the ranch for more than a day. Rosa and Miguel stayed at the house to care for the children, and Vincent's foreman managed the ranch operations. They stayed in a fine hotel overlooking the bay. They ate at elegant restaurants, attended a theater performance, walked along the waterfront. It was a glimpse into a different world, one of sophistication and culture that was far removed from their daily life on the ranch. On their last evening, as they stood on the balcony of their hotel room, watching the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, Vincent turned to Natalie and took both her hands in his. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if I had not spoken up that day?" he asked. Natalie considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. I think I would have eventually married someone else, probably someone suitable and boring. I would have had a conventional life here in town. It would not have been terrible, but it would not have been this. What about you? Do you wonder what your life would have been like if you had stayed silent? All the time. I would probably still be drifting from ranch to ranch, working for other people, never putting down roots. I might have eventually saved enough to buy some land, but I would have been alone. No wife, no children, no real home. Speaking up that day was the best decision I ever made. Even though you married a complete stranger, especially because I married you. I did not know it at the time, but you were exactly what I needed. You gave me a reason to be more than just a drifter. You gave me a family, a purpose, a life worth living." Natalie leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I used to think that day in the church was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Now I see it as the best. It brought me to you." They stood there together as the light faded from the sky. Two people who had found each other in the strangest of circumstances and built something beautiful from the ruins of a failed promise. When they returned to the ranch, the children rushed to greet them, full of stories about what had happened while they were gone. The house was chaotic and loud and full of life. Vincent caught Natalie's eye across the room and she smiled back, both of them acknowledging the richness of what they had created. The years rolled forward in the rhythm of seasons and growth. James turned 18 in 1896 and announced his intention to attend college in San Francisco, studying veterinary medicine. Vincent was immensely proud, though he admitted to Natalie in private that he would miss his son's help with the horses. "He should follow his own path," Natalie said. "You taught him to think for himself. Now we have to trust him to do it." Elizabeth, at 13, was already showing signs of becoming a talented artist. She filled notebooks with sketches of the horses, the landscape, her siblings. Thomas, at 11, was showing every sign of wanting to follow in his father's footsteps, more interested in the ranch than in his schoolwork. Little Sarah, at 4, was still figuring out who she would become. As the century drew to a close, Natalie and Vincent took stock of their lives. They were both in their 40s now, no longer young, but not yet old. The ranch was prosperous and established. Their children were healthy and thriving. They had built something that would last, something that could be passed down to future generations. On New Year's Eve in 1899, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, they hosted a celebration at the ranch. Friends and family came from miles around to mark the occasion. There was music and dancing, food and drink, laughter and joy. At midnight, as everyone cheered and toasted the new century, Vincent pulled Natalie aside. "I have been thinking about that day," he said. "Our wedding day." "What about it? I never properly proposed to you. I made an offer in a moment of crisis, and you accepted out of necessity. But I never asked you properly, with love and intention." Natalie smiled. "Vincent, we have been married for 17 years. I think we are past the need for proposals. Humor me." He took both her hands, his gray eyes serious and warm in the lamplight. "Natalie Quinlan, you are the love of my life, my best friend, my partner in everything that matters. Would you do me the honor of staying married to me for the rest of our days?" "Yes," she said, laughing through sudden tears. "Yes, I absolutely will." He kissed her then, a kiss full of tenderness and promise, and the deep security of long love. Around them, their friends and family applauded, understanding without words what they were witnessing. The new century brought new challenges and changes. James finished his studies and opened a veterinary practice in Sacramento, though he came home often to help with the horses. Elizabeth, at 17, was being courted by the son of a neighboring rancher, a young man that both Natalie and Vincent approved of. Thomas, at 14, was already working alongside his father, learning the intricacies of horse training and ranch management. Sarah, at 9, was discovering a love of music, begging for piano lessons. In 1903, Elizabeth married her young man in a ceremony at the ranch. It was a beautiful, joyous celebration, nothing like the fraught disaster of Natalie's first attempt at marriage. Vincent walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes. When the vows were spoken and the couple was pronounced husband and wife, Natalie squeezed Vincent's hand, remembering their own unconventional beginning. "She looks so happy," Vincent murmured. "She is. They both are. They chose each other freely, with love. Like we did, eventually." Natalie smiled. Eventually. 2 years later, James announced his engagement to a young woman he had met in Sacramento. The wedding was held in the city, a grander affair than Elizabeth's ranch celebration. Natalie and Vincent attended with pride, watching their eldest son take his vows with confidence and joy. Thomas showed no interest in marriage, devoted entirely to the ranch and the horses. At 18, he was already proving to be as skilled as his father, with an almost intuitive understanding of horses. Vincent was grooming him to eventually take over the operation, though Vincent himself had no intention of retiring anytime soon. Sarah, at 14, was the unexpected scholar of the family. She excelled in her studies and had ambitions to become a teacher. Natalie supported this wholeheartedly, remembering how important education had been to Vincent. In 1908, as they approached their 26th wedding anniversary, Vincent fell ill. It started as a simple cold, but developed into pneumonia. Natalie nursed him through the worst of it, sitting beside his bed day and night, forcing him to take the medicines the doctor prescribed. For several terrible days, she thought she might lose him, but Vincent was strong and he fought his way back to health. The illness aged him, though. He recovered fully, but there was a new fragility about him afterward. He tired more easily and could no longer work the long hours he once had. "I am getting old," he said to Natalie one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. It was a ritual they had maintained for years, this quiet time together at the end of the day. "We both are," Natalie replied. "It happens to everyone. I never thought I would live to be old. When I was younger, drifting from place to place, I assumed I would die young, kicked by a horse or caught in a winter storm or shot in some saloon brawl. I never imagined this, growing old surrounded by family in a home I built. Are you complaining? Not for a second. I am grateful for every single day. Grateful that I was in that church on that specific morning. Grateful that I had the courage to speak up. Grateful for every moment since." Natalie leaned against him. "I am grateful too. For all of it. Even the hard parts. They made us who we are." As the years advanced, they settled into the comfortable rhythms of long marriage. They had weathered storms together, literal and metaphorical. They had raised 4 children to adulthood, built a successful ranch, created a legacy that would outlast them. They had grown from strangers who married in crisis into partners who could not imagine life without each other. Grandchildren arrived, first from James and his wife, then from Elizabeth and her husband. Vincent was a devoted grandfather, patient and playful with the little ones. Natalie loved watching him with the grandchildren, seeing him rediscover simple joys through their eyes. Thomas married in 1910, a quiet ceremony to a sensible young woman from town. They built a house on the ranch property near Vincent and Natalie's home. Thomas took over more and more of the daily operations, allowing Vincent to step back and enjoy semi-retirement. Sarah left for teacher training in Sacramento, fulfilling her ambitions. She wrote long letters home, describing her studies and experiences. Both Natalie and Vincent missed her terribly, but were proud of her determination. In 1912, on their 30th wedding anniversary, the family gathered for a celebration. All 4 children were there with their spouses and families. The house was full of people and noise and love. Natalie looked around the crowded parlor and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That evening, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Vincent and Natalie took their customary walk to the porch. The August night was warm, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. 30 years, Vincent said. I can hardly believe it. It has gone so fast. I still remember that day in the church so clearly, but it feels like it happened to someone else. In a way it did. We were different people then. Natalie thought about this. It was true. The frightened, humiliated girl who had accepted a stranger's proposal out of desperation was long gone. The lonely, drifting cowboy who had made that impulsive offer was similarly vanished. They had grown and changed together, shaping each other through years of shared life. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" she asked. "In the room above the store?" "I said a lot of things that night. You said I could leave if I wanted, that you would not hold me against my will. I remember. I meant it too. I know you did. I think that was when I started to trust you. Not love you yet, but trust you. You gave me back the choice that Nathaniel had taken away." Vincent pulled her close. "I fell in love with you so fast, Natalie. By the end of that first week, I was already half gone. By the time we moved to the ranch, I was completely yours. Waiting for you to come to feel the same was agony. I am sorry I made you wait. Do not be. You needed time, and I was willing to give it. Some things cannot be rushed. Real love, the kind that lasts, takes time to build." They stood together in companionable silence, watching the night deepen around them. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse nickered softly. The creek murmured its endless song. This land, this life, was theirs. They had built it together from nothing more than hope and hard work. The years continued their inexorable march. Vincent's health remained generally good, though he moved more slowly than he once had. Natalie developed arthritis in her hands, making sewing and detailed work difficult. But these were minor complaints, the natural consequences of aging. Sarah came home in 1915, having completed her training. She took a position teaching at the school they had established on the ranch property, taking over from the teacher who was retiring. She lived with Natalie and Vincent, filling their home with her energy and ideas. More grandchildren arrived. James had 3 children now, Elizabeth 4, Thomas 2, so far. The Quinlan family was large and growing, spreading across the valley. Family gatherings were chaotic, wonderful affairs with multiple generations mixing together. In 1917, when the United States entered the Great War, James tried to enlist as an Army veterinarian. He was rejected due to his age. He was already 39, but he contributed to the war effort by training horses for cavalry units. The war felt distant to their quiet valley, but it touched them nonetheless. Several young men from the area enlisted and did not return. Through it all, Natalie and Vincent remained each other's constant. They had been together now longer than they had been apart. Their lives were so intertwined that it was impossible to imagine one without the other. On a warm spring day in 1920, they celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the two of them. Sarah had taken the evening to visit friends in town, giving them privacy. 38 years, Natalie said, shaking her head in wonder. Who would have thought? Anyone who saw us together, we were always meant to find each other, one way or another. Do you really believe that? I do. Maybe not the way it happened, but somehow. Call it fate or providence or just luck. But we were meant to be together. After dinner, they walked out to the corral where Vincent kept his favorite horses. The stallion he had bought all those years ago was long gone. But his descendants were there, fine animals that carried on his bloodline. Vincent leaned on the fence, watching them graze in the evening light. I have had a good life, he said quietly. Better than I ever dreamed possible. A loving wife, children I am proud of, work that matters, land of my own. That scared, angry boy who lost his mother would never believe this is where he would end up. Natalie wrapped her arm around his waist. That lonely girl standing at the altar, humiliated and lost, would never believe it either. We saved each other that day, I think. I like to think we did. They stood together until the stars began to appear, two people who had taken a wild chance on each other and turned it into a lifetime of love. Vincent lived to see his 70th birthday in 1924, surrounded by children and grandchildren. He was slowing down considerably now, his hair completely gray, his face lined with age. But his mind was sharp, and his love for Natalie had never dimmed. They had been married for 42 years when Vincent finally admitted he was tired. It was late autumn, and he had been feeling unwell for weeks. The doctor came and went with grave expressions and gentle words. Vincent had a weak heart, worn out by years of hard living and hard work. I am not afraid, he told Natalie one evening as they lay in bed together. I have had more than I ever deserved, more than I ever hoped for. Do not talk like that. You will be fine. You are just tired. Natalie, he took her hand. We both know what is happening. I do not want to leave you, but I am grateful for every day we had together. She was crying now, unable to hold back the tears. I cannot imagine life without you. You are strong. You always have been. Remember that girl who stood at the altar and chose to take a chance on a stranger? That courage is still inside you. You will be all right. Promise me you will fight. Do not give up. I promise. He held on through the winter, fighting with the same determination that had defined his entire life. But in early March of 1925, on a morning when the first wildflowers were beginning to bloom in the valley, Vincent Quinlan died peacefully in his sleep, with Natalie holding his hand. The funeral was the largest the valley had ever seen. People came from across the region to pay their respects to the man who had been known for his integrity, his skill with horses, and his devotion to his family. Natalie stood surrounded by her children and grandchildren, accepting condolences with quiet dignity. But inside, she felt shattered, as though half of herself had been torn away. In the days and weeks that followed, she discovered that Vincent had been right. She was strong enough to survive this. It did not feel like it at first. The grief was overwhelming, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. But gradually, she began to find her way forward. Thomas ran the ranch with his father's same dedication and skill. Sarah stayed close, providing companionship and support. James and Elizabeth visited frequently with their families. Natalie was never alone unless she chose to be. On what would have been their 43rd anniversary that August, Natalie walked out to the spot where Vincent was buried, on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. She sat beside his grave and talked to him, telling him about the grandchildren and the ranch and all the small details of daily life she knew he would want to hear. I miss you every single day, she said finally. But I am grateful we had all those years. You gave me a life I never could have imagined. You taught me what real love looks like, and you kept your promise. You were a faithful and devoted husband for all your days. The wind rustled through the grass, and for a moment, Natalie could almost feel Vincent beside her, his presence as real as it had been in life. She lived on for another 12 years, watching her grandchildren grow and great-grandchildren arrive. She maintained the traditions Vincent had established, keeping the ranch operating as a family business. She told stories about their unconventional beginning to anyone who would listen, making sure the younger generations understood the foundation their family was built on. In 1937, at the age of 77, Natalie Bradford Quinlan died peacefully in her sleep in the house Vincent had built for her. She was buried beside her husband on the hill overlooking the valley they had loved. All 4 of her children were there, along with numerous grandchildren and great-grandchildren. At the funeral, James spoke about his parents' remarkable love story. He told the tale of how his father had stood up in a church and offered his hand to a stranger, how his mother had found the courage to accept. He talked about how they had built something lasting from that impulsive decision, creating a legacy of love and integrity that would carry on through generations. "My father used to say that offering to marry my mother was the best decision he ever made," James said. "And my mother always said that accepting his offer saved her life in more ways than one. They taught us that real love is not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It is about showing up every day, doing the hard work, choosing each other again and again. That is the legacy they left us, and it is one we will honor for as long as the Quinlan name endures in this valley." The ranch continued to operate for many more decades, passing through the hands of multiple generations. The story of how Vincent and Natalie met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. The small house that Vincent had built first, the one-room cabin where they had begun their life together, was preserved and maintained as a reminder of where it all started. And in Yuba City, there was still a very old church where, on one terrible and then wonderful day in August of 1882, a woman had been abandoned at the altar, and a cowboy had offered his hand instead, changing the course of 2 lives forever and creating a love story that would echo through time. The pews where Vincent Quinlan had sat before making his fateful offer became a place of local legend, and more than one young couple over the years came to sit there, hoping that some of that same courage and love might rub off on them. The end.